I would love for you to do today, would be really helpful for me in this technical issue I'm in. If you would introduce yourself for everybody.
Sure.
We've got a lot of new people coming in from the general public, and we typically, if you'll remember, we speak to health and wellness experts. But today, we've got a large amount of people registered for this webinar that are just, the general public wanting to know more about the immune system and your products and how can we get ahead of what's going on today. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sounds good. No, so my name is Kiran Krishnan. I'm a co-founder and chief science officer at Microbiome Labs. Microbiome Labs, if you're not familiar, we're a company that is highly focused on finding health solutions by taking advantage of the power of the microbiome. The microbiome controls upwards of 80 or 90% of all of the metabolic function in your body. The microbiome controls your immune system for the most part. And of course, it controls your metabolic system as well. So the microbiome plays a huge impact in your overall health and wellness and your outcomes throughout life. And so as a company, we are dedicated to putting biology in the driver's seat and finding the right types of solutions in order to be able to find healing opportunities for health practitioners. And again, the microbiome is going to be continue to be the next biggest advance in science. In the last 5 years, there's been over 50,000 published studies on the microbiome and health. So it's quite overwhelming, and we are excited to be part of that. So in my background, I'm a research microbiologist. So I came initially from the academic track, but then I got into the industry and got into human clinical trials, which is what I started off in the industry first, and then worked for a while behind the scenes, helping companies formulate product, putting together scientific substantiation before launching Microbiome Labs in 2012. So, and then now I try to spend as much as my time as I can on programs like this to provide education, share knowledge, and so on, to empower people to kind of understand how their body works, understand the new view of what the human body is and the human system is with regards to the microbes that control most things, and really kind of empowering people with that information.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say is there are so many options out there for probiotics and prebiotics and gut health and support and all of those things. Lord knows I've run the gamut on them in the last almost 20 years. I've been, studying health and all of that. But I want to say that you guys do this so right. You do it so right that I honestly, when someone sends me a new product, which happens to me every week, someone says, will you partner with us? What do you think? Will you let us do a webinar and promote us? I always say, you know what, I'm really happy with where I am. And to be honest with you, I haven't been able to say that historically. And one of the reasons is because you bring the education, you are transparent with your information. You guys are always doing the studies and trying to make things even better. And I don't see a lot of companies doing that. See a lot of people telling us how great their stuff is, but they can't back it up with science, and they don't really have an educational train, so to speak, like you are. I know that you do a lot of traveling, right? You do a lot of traveling.
Yeah. I do, and thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. That was the whole philosophy behind foundation of the company. One of the things that we noticed, and that's from me being behind the scenes, working with companies, is there was a massive gap in companies that need to fulfill a true therapeutic function. Right? There's a lot of trends, a lot of exciting marketing that occurs in the supplement industry, and when you look at probiotics and how they were being formulated, it was so evident of that, where for the most part, companies were basically going more strains, more CFUs. That means better in some way, right? If my competitor has 35 billion CFUs, I want to go to 40 because that's how I'm going to compete, without any thinking and stopping and thinking, like, does that actually make sense from a science perspective, right? Does it biologically drive any change, or maybe is it problematic? And so we saw that massive gap, and we saw companies tumbling in that direction where it's just marketing driving innovation rather than putting biology in the driver's seat. And so for us, being big science nerds that we are, right off the bat, when we launched the company, we said, we're going to spend more on research than we ever will on marketing, and that's our tenet. Right. And so driving that is going to be continues to be really important for us.
Yeah, and that's actually, when you do it right in any business, really, but especially in the
Mhm.
supplement business, when you do it right, then your people market for you, and that's
Mhm.
really what it's all about. I'm the kind of person, I'm going to go by word of mouth, and I'm going to go by my experience with somebody before I'm going to go by anything else. That's the most
Yeah,
important thing. Your fancy ads don't mean a whole lot to me if you can't back it up with education and support, right? So
exactly.
I have all of these. I have a bunch of products sitting here that I take, and I to the disappointment sometimes of my son, I'm like, all right, here's your 3 pills for today. Here's the powder I'm putting in your nighttime drink, all of that. So we're going to talk about a few of those in a moment, but I want to start out with, telling the general public. Let's talk to the general public here for just a moment. The ones who are going to Walgreens and grabbing, a PB8 off the shelf, or maybe they're eating yogurt and they think that that's satisfying that probiotic need for their gut. Can you tell us, number one, why is yogurt a bad choice? I can't believe we're still talking about this many years later, but it's a great marketing technique. Why is
Mhm.
it a bad choice for a probiotic, or not optimal, rather? And then how can people actually do their own sleuthing, so to speak, when they're out in the world and they think that that's going to work for them? What do they look for to say that this is not the product you should be spending your money and time on?
Yeah, really, really important question. That was one of the questions I had in my own mind about 10, 12 years ago when we were really starting to investigate the whole probiotic space. What's really important to note is that the vast majority of probiotics that you will encounter at the store, on the retail shelf, including what's in the dairy counter, the refrigerated dairy counter, these things were all developed well before we knew anything about the microbiome, right? We really didn't know anything about the microbiome until about 2010, 12, right around then, and the vast majority of products you see on the shelf were developed well before that. So they were developing products that are supposed to be therapeutic for the gut in a vacuum of information, right? It was made and built on presumption. Yogurt in particular is interesting because yogurt is a fermented dairy product. Now, there may be some benefits from the ferment itself if it's done correctly, but most commercial yogurts are a really shortcut to fermentation, and they're not truly fermented products. And then often what they'll do is add back live culture to give some sort of count of bacteria in the product, right? The problem is the moment that stuff hits your stomach, all of that's dying. All of those microbes are dying. And the microbes that are used in yogurt are not selected for any sort of therapeutic benefit in the gut. They're selected for their ability to break down the dairy and create a unique taste, right? So they are a food microbe that is designed to achieve a food outcome, right? They're not therapeutic organisms. So a lot of people do that. A lot of people are eating yogurt. The yogurt industry is much bigger, of course, than the probiotic industry. And the vast majority of people will consume yogurt with the intent and idea that they are taking in a probiotic, and you couldn't be farther from that truth.
Right.
There is no known probiotic benefit by the World Health Organization's definition of a probiotic from the vast majority of yogurts that you can consume, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Then with regards to the other products on the shelf, the moment you see a product that what I call, when I was back working heavily in the formulation side for other companies, what I call kitchen sink formulas, right? Where they're just throwing everything in without any rhyme or reason as to why they pick certain organisms, what is the role of that organism with respect to the rest of the organisms. 9 out of 10 times, I can tell you, having sat in so many formulation meetings with companies, the way they formulate is based on one-upping their closest competitor, right? If the closest competitor has 15 strains, they want 17, even though 15 nor 17 make any sense, right? From a scientific perspective. So these are marketing driven companies. They're not driven by science. You'll be surprised how few large supplement companies in the marketplace have no scientific groups within them at all, and they work with people like me who are outside people who are coming in and trying to help them with the science. So what you should be really looking for is you shouldn't be romanced by this huge numbers, 200 billion, 600 billion. I can tell you now, having read thousands of probiotic studies, that there is no rationale between having 50 billion versus 10 billion or 100 billion versus 5 billion. The dose in that manner does not make a difference, right? It's the quality of strains. And the vast majority of probiotic studies are done with single strains at a dose of 3 to 5 billion, right? That's it. That's the vast majority of studies. There are very, very few studies on any of these kitchen sink formulas where they kind of throw in a whole bunch of stuff just to make the label look very elaborate and be able to say things like 17 strains, 100 billion CFUs. Those are all marketing jargon. And again, the vast majority of those, when it hits the stomach, will die in the stomach anyway. You know, but that was one of the first tests that we did when we first started investigating the probiotic industries. We took somewhere around 40 of the top selling products and put them through simulated gastric solution, which is a US pharmacopoeia standard of a way of studying things that go through the stomach. And the vast majority of them, and 98% of the products, died in the stomach almost instantly. You know, so.
So that's not what stomach acid. What, I mean, it just didn't survive stomach acid. Is that what happened there?
Yeah, so that's the key. So it's important to note that the stomach acid is actually called a gastric barrier, and it's an important part of the first part of your immune system. One of its job, besides the digestive benefits of the stomach acid, is actually to act as a curtain of protection against microbes coming into the system. And so microbes are killed off in your stomach acid. For those who are listening who don't really understand acid intensity, it's done by the pH scale, right? So your stomach acid could be at a pH of around 1.2, 1.3. And you know, a lot of times probiotics, that ones that even test for stomach survivability, will test it at a pH of like 3.2. Now that may sound like not a big difference, because 1.3 to 3.2 is not big, but a pH is a logarithmic scale. So each number is actually a tenfold difference, right? So even the ones that say that they check it for survivability often are checking it 100-fold at a higher pH than what your stomach normally is. And so it's a little wordplay in games, right? And so your stomach acid is so intense that if you were able to reach down and touch it, it would burn off the tips of your fingers, right? So it's a really intense hydrochloric acid, and it kills microbes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you said that about the immune system, because I do want to touch on this topic, because one of the things that I'm doing here in Hamilton County, where I live, in Chattanooga, you know, I have a teenager, and I'm that mom. I'm the one that's, you know, the no mask mom that says this is insanity. Let's take care of our immune system and stop this nonsense. Let's get back to normal. And so one of the things that I keep trying to share with our representatives and our leaders here is that we need more education about the immune system. Why are we not talking about the immune system? Why are we talking about, you know, a dangerous vaccine that can come in, and even the testing that can be dangerous and can harm our immune system? Why are we not educating people in the way that you and I are today to be able to empower them and give them, you know, the tools that they need to have a healthy immune system, so all of this nonsense can stop, right? So can you go into that a little bit about the immune system and it being in the gut, and how all of this stress and fear, especially, you know, I'm an advocate for children, elderly people, and animals. I have a big fat soft spot for people like that. Can you go into a little bit of the science behind that, what's happening to the stomach acid being reduced or under stress? You know, go into those terms in a way that you understand.
Yeah. So one important note about the immune system, especially as it relates to the current crisis that we're going to, is that, you know, our immune system is perfectly well and capable to handle something like this, right? This is not some insanely exotic organism that our immune system does not have the capability of dealing with. In fact, most people's immune system will deal with it pretty easily. And I know when you know, the virus first showed up, there was a lot of talk of not having immunity against it. And that's true in the technical sense, but it does not mean that our immune system is ill-equipped to handle it, right? Our immune system is perfectly capable of handling such a pathogen. So that is an important note to keep in mind. And so when we talk about immune function, what's critical to note is that there's two main phases of the immune system. And I'll talk about why is it some people are having a real severe response to this pathogen, and why some people can get it and not even know they have it, right? What is the difference between their immune systems? And then what does stress and things like that do to the immune system? And then what does a messed up gut do to the immune system? That's another really important topic. So just a quick overview on the immune system. You've got two phases to the immune system response in general. You've got something called the innate immune response, and then you've got the adaptive immune response, right? So the innate immune response is a part of the immune response that responds within hours to something new entering into the body, an infectious agent of some sort. The innate immune response gets to the site of action. I'll tell you about how they do that. And then they will create a cascading response that eventually brings the adaptive immune system in and allows the adaptive immune system to take over. The analogy I use for people to help them understand it, because the information around the immune system can be kind of nuanced in a way that it's hard for people to understand unless you study it. But imagine your body is a house and you've got thousands of windows all around the house. And the whole goal of the occupants of the house is to prevent too many bugs from entering into those windows, right? And all the windows are open. And you've got two groups of people that protect that home. You've got one group that is really fast in terms of their ability to move and respond to alarms of bugs coming into the window. And then the other group that is slower to respond, but they're highly specialized, right? So the first group will respond to any bug, but they respond to everything with a blowtorch, right? So if you've got a window on the 20th floor and a bunch of bugs have come in, then there's an alarm that goes out that, hey, there's something new here. Those guys with the blowtorches show up there first, and they're going to start blowtorching every bug that they see. Now, that's going to surely kill or control the bugs, but it's also going to burn the wall behind it a little bit, right? And so then the thinking is that if all of the response is with the blowtorch people, you are going to kill the bugs, but eventually you'll also burn the house down, right? So at some point, you also need the other guys to come in, the more specialized ones who have machinery that can specifically target that bug without damaging anything else. We need them to step in so the blowtorch guys can stop before burning the entire house down, right? So the innate immune system is the rapid acting, but it's using a blowtorch to control the situation. If that goes on for too long, then the overall damage to the body and the tissue is a net negative return on controlling the pathogen, right? That's when you start going into things called the cytokine storm and so on. So I'll elaborate on that a little bit. So what you really need in order for the immune response to progress in the right way, you need the innate immune response to start it, but then within a relatively short amount of time, typically 1 to 2 days, you want that adaptive immune response to come in and take over the control, because they're going to be highly specific to that organism without damaging anything else and without causing all the symptomology, right? When you get sick and you feel the fever, you feel the fatigue, all of the stuffiness, all of that, that's all the immune response that's making you feel that way. It's not the organism itself, right? And that's the innate immune response, right? So once the innate immune response backs off, the blowtorch guys are backing off, now the specialists are coming in, that's when all those symptoms subside, right? So just that's your immunology 101. Now,
that was a fantastic analogy. Thank you for that, because
of course,
it's complicated. I mean, it's so complicated, it's hard sometimes to simplify for people, right? So
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And also, and this is, let's just be clear for everyone that's listening, you guys, this isn't just in regards to what a potential coronavirus, or it's the flu, it's the common cold, it's any insult to the body that comes in, anything you're allergic to, toxic, overload of the environment, weed sprays, whatever. Your immune system responds to everything this way. Is that correct?
absolutely everything. Yeah. I mean, even food particles, everything that comes into the body, right? And with something like food, things that you should be tolerating that shouldn't have a blowtorch response, then there's another part of the immune system called the T regulatory system. And I'll talk about that as well. Because, when you have food sensitivities or severe allergies, that means the blowtorch guys are going after the pollen, they're going after the ragweed, they're going after the proteins and things that you eat, and then blowtorching the crap out of the whole area. So that's why you feel the way you feel when you eat or are exposed to those things, right? So just keep that visual in mind, that anytime you feel a real negative response to something you're exposed to, it's because the blowtorch people are working and doing their thing. Now, we need them. They're extremely important for early on control of things like infections, but you don't want them going after food. You don't want them going after pollen and ragweed and things that we encounter in the outside environment. So that's where the regulatory component of the immune system comes into play as well. I'll talk about that. But let's talk about the signaling that occurs in the immune system. That's really important, right? I mentioned when bugs enter the window, there's an alarm that goes off, right? That alarm is important to let those blowtorch guys know where to go and how and when to get there. And what is that alarm? So in the body, what we've come to find out over the last few years is that the main triggers to alert the immune system that a pathogen is present comes from the microbiome, right? So the microbes in your body are acting as the neighborhood watch for your entire system. Why is that? Well, it's a simple issue of geography and physics, right? So when you look at the inside part of your body, we used to think of the skin as the largest barrier system in the body, right? But the skin is somewhere around, I think, 40 square feet. If you lay out all of the skin that you have on your outer part of your body, it makes up about 40 square feet, right? If you look inside your body, it's covered by something called the mucosal system, right? Any way you enter the body, through your nose, your eyes, your mouth, through your urogenital tract, even through your skin, you enter into something called the mucosal system. The mucosal system inside your body is about 4,000 square feet. Right? That's the surface area that's all wrapped up and folded up inside your body. So anytime a pathogen, a virus, bacteria, fungus, it doesn't matter, enters into the body, it's entering into some part of the mucosal system, right? Now, the mucosal system is also already covered with microbes. All of the microbes, viruses, bacteria, fungi, all of that live inside your body live in that mucosal layer, right? So imagine the task of the immune system. Put yourself in the shoes of an immune cell. You are an immune cell. Your whole job, in part, is to monitor the system for viruses, bacteria, and fungi that might come in and infect the host, right? But the system you are monitoring is already covered with viruses, bacteria, and fungi. So how in the world would you ever know who's good and who's bad? Right? How would you monitor and survey every single microbe in that 4,000 square feet every single minute of every single day to look for potential harmful organisms coming in? Here's another analogy to help people wrap their head around it. The ratio of microbes in the body to immune cells that survey the body is 200,000 to 1, right?
Wow.
So imagine you are that immune cell. And let's put it in a context that we all might understand. Imagine you are at an outdoor music festival that's occurring in a given stadium. In that stadium, you have 200,000 people. You are the lone security guard who's responsible for monitoring the safety of all 200,000 people. Among those 200,000 people, there are 5 people that look exactly like everyone else that are potentially harmful, right? How would you ever survey that entire stadium, one person at a time, to try to figure out who may be friend and who may be foe, right?
Right.
It's impossible. That's the job of the immune system, and it's an impossible job. Now, in that analogy, the only way you could do it is if the other 199,995 people were radioed in and working with you as your eyes and ears, right? And the moment they see some unusual activity, they can radio to you and say, hey, something weird going on over here by the concession stand, you should come over here. That's the only way you could do it. That's exactly what's happening between your microbiome and your immune system. The microbiome is the first detector of something new entering into the system, right? So if you breathe in influenza virus, for example, right? You get exposed to the flu, you breathe in influenza virus, the virus enters into your upper respiratory tract, it starts infecting the lining of your upper respiratory tract. The first signals to alert the immune system that that virus is present are the microbes that live in that respiratory tract, right? The cell itself that gets infected will start sending signals, but then the microbes around it will start sending signals to your immune system saying, hey, something's going on here. You need to get over here. And it's calling the blowtorch people, right? And so the blowtorch people show up and start trying to control the infection. And if your immune system is functioning properly, your microbiome will actually convey the message to the adaptive part, which is the specialized people, so that they can show up as well, right? So two major steps to immune response, where if the microbiome is messed up, you will falter. First major step is the initial alert that something new has come in. That is in large part conducted by the microbiome. The second critical step is that transition from the blowtorch response to the adaptive response. That is also a critical role of the microbiome, right? So here's what's happening with people who have the really bad response to COVID, right? And we know in good measure what kind of people that is. Those are people with metabolic syndrome, so obesity, diabetes, hypertension, age, right? Those are all factors. What is common among all those factors? All of those factors have something called chronic low-grade inflammation, right? Inflammation is the biggest determining factor of how your body is going to respond to COVID. So let me explain why that is. So remember I said when a virus first enters into your system, take the influenza virus, when it first gets in, the first entities that signal to your immune system that a virus is present are the microbes that live in that local area. How do they signal your immune system? Well, they use inflammatory signals to alert the immune system, right? They shoot out alarms or really flares that are inflammatory markers. That's how the immune system detects, wait, something's going on in the lungs, we got to get there, right? So that's the signaling. Now imagine if you had chronic low-grade inflammation all over your body. The alarms that are being sounded by the local microbiome are getting drowned out by all the other alarms in the body, so the immune system gets misdirected. Right. Again, I like to use analogies because these can be complex things for people to understand. Imagine a neighborhood of 500 homes, right? And one home is actually starting a fire. There's a fire in the living room. It's not obvious yet because the fire is still small, but that one home is on fire. Now, that one home's alarm is going off, fire alarm. It's easy for the fire station to know where to go, and it hones in on that one home and starts to put out the fire. But imagine if that one home is on fire and it's got an alarm going off, but all 500 homes have alarms going off as well, right? It becomes impossible for the fire truck to figure out which home is actually the one on fire until the fire gets big enough that they start to see smoke.
Yeah.
Right? And at that point, the infection in that analogy has already set in quite massively, right? So for people with chronic low-grade inflammation through those conditions, right, the two big faults that occur is A, the immune system is slow to respond to the presence of the virus because the microbiome is trying to send signals, but the signals are getting drowned out by all the other inflammation. Now the virus has lots of time to multiply and infect more cells and increase the viral load. And again, you're not experiencing any symptoms at this point, right? Because the virus is just multiplying, getting itself multiplied by infecting your own cells. Then when the immune system finally notices it, because the signals become so big and the smoke, in the analogy I use, becomes so big, finally the immune system shows up. But remember, it's the blowtorch guys that show up. And their blowtorch response is overwhelming because now the immune system's freaking out because the viral load is increased so much that they just put every inflammatory, tissue damaging type of response they can to try to control things. So now all of a sudden you're asymptomatic, and then boom, you get hit by really bad fatigue. You can't breathe if it's in your lungs. You've got crazy high fever. You lose taste and smell, all of these things because of all of the massive inflammatory response. Right now, here's a problem. Most people who have those chronic low-grade inflammatory conditions also have messed up microbiomes, right? And there's a lot of argument to say that the reason you have those chronic low-grade inflammatory conditions is because your microbiome is messed up. So already your immune system function is not going to operate properly. So now you've got this overwhelming blowtorch response going on. You're feeling like crap, because you're now really sick. The symptomology from all of this comes from the immune response. And because your microbiome is not in good shape, your microbiome is struggling to shift the immune response from that blowtorch to the adaptive. So now you stay in the blowtorch response for longer and longer. Virus keeps multiplying, and you start going down the track of something called a cytokine storm, right?
Mhm.
So now the blowtorch people are running the show and doing it for too long. Now you're getting tissue damage, whether it's in the lungs, the airways, anywhere else. Tissue damage, symptomology becomes more severe, and so on. And then eventually the thing that really kills people from this particular virus and any other virus, whether it's influenza, is the actual immune response itself, right?
Mhm.
If the immune response is uncontrolled and you cannot get the blowtorch guys to back off and get the adaptive response in there, then you're going to end up actually damaging tissue enough where the host succumbs to it, right? So hopefully all that makes sense. And at the end of the day, it's the microbiome's role to facilitate all of that response. Now, the nutrients that we always talk about from an immune system standpoint, like vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, magnesium, those are all critically important. But what they do is they facilitate reactions that are supposed to be going on to go from one part of the immune system to the other, right? They themselves cannot actually create the response if you have a damaged microbiome. So one of the things I keep trying to explain to people is, as important as it is to take those micronutrients, I take them all myself as well, but you cannot take enough of those to overcome a damaged microbiome, right? If your microbiome is damaged and not functioning, your immune system is going to be compromised anyway. And no matter how much vitamin C and zinc you take, it's not going to overcome that damage. So you have to focus on both. You have to take your micronutrients and you have to work on your microbiome in order for this whole thing to respond properly.
Right. Yeah. And let's swing it back for a moment to the again, the one of the very top things that's going to affect you in general is the stress. So
Yeah.
this is what I tell people, when I first started health coaching, over almost 11 years ago, I was of the belief that you start with what you eat. It all starts in the gut. Whatever you put in your mouth is going to affect you. But I have, in the last few years, since educating health coaches all over the world and trying to bring everyone to one place where we all start with the basics, right? I always say you have to start with your perception of stress, because any thought that you have affects your gut. Any thought, if the stressful thought, a fearful thought, an experience that you're having, your gut will be affected, your immune system will be affected across the board. So you can eat paleo, vegan, carnivore, whatever diet you think you need to be eating, but if your body doesn't have hydrochloric acid and you are not, you don't have a healthy biome, it doesn't matter what you put in your mouth. It's almost a waste of money, so to speak, to spend money on organic food, humanely raised meats, if you're not in a place where you can digest it in a healthy way.
Yeah, and let me explain what stress actually does to your microbiome and how that directly relates to immune function, right? So when your body releases things like epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol because you're stressed, one of the first things that occurs is you've got a lot of latent microbes that are sitting around, that are opportunistic, that are waiting for the signal to start proliferating, right? So, and everybody has those. It's inevitable. We've all been exposed to Epstein-Barr virus and cytomegalovirus and herpes simplex virus and all of these kind of viruses throughout our lives. And that's fine. Our immune system controls them to a certain degree. And for the most part, they stay dormant within your system because they know that the moment they try to create problems and infect, your immune system is going to come and shut them down. However, they've been programmed to look for stress signals in the body because they also know that when your stress signals are up, that means your immune system is compromised. And because your immune system is compromised, that gives them the opportunity to start proliferating. So one of the first things that occurs when you're stressed is you start creating dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is the imbalance of organisms within that microbiome. You actually start favoring the growth of pathogenic and opportunistic organisms. Now, once they start growing, viruses aside, once the pathogenic or opportunistic bacteria start growing, they start producing toxins. And when they produce toxins, it actually increases the inflammation, the leaky gut, the metabolic dysfunction, all of that, which all compromises your immune response as well. So stress is such a huge component in basically dismantling the system. And it's a two-way street, because what happens is When we get stressed and we get anxious, we release these hormones in response to it. And those hormones are there to elicit the fight or flight response, right? But the organisms that are sitting in your body have learned to read those to understand that now the host system is compromised. So it's a great time for them to proliferate. Now, as they start proliferating, many of those organisms also create toxins that continue to increase the release of stress hormones, right? And why do they do that? Well, because that situation is good for them, right? So take, for example, Campylobacter. Campylobacter is a bacterial pathogen that one of the ways that it impacts the host is by producing a toxin that creates panic. And there's lots of organisms like that. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle, right? So once you're stressed, once you're in this negative place in your mindset, the way you see things, the way you view the world, and just your perceptions of everything around you, that starts perpetuating an ongoing problem that will continue to compromise your system. And like you said, you can eat the right foods and all of that stuff, but the benefits of those will be marginalized because of the state that you're in, right?
Yeah.
So
that's a great explanation. And so one of the things that I was really surprised by several years ago when I was doing research on H. pylori and learning about gut dysbiosis and overgrowth of bacteria and SIBO and all of those things, was that people would say, well, stress caused my dad's ulcers or my mom's ulcers, or I got ulcers from stress. But what's missed there, it's almost like how people think the mind and body aren't connected, right? Like people seem to separate the mind from the body. I don't know how that's possible. It's all connected. But how does stress cause H. pylori? Well, it reduces your stomach acid, and that bacteria actually flourishes in a non-acidic state. So if you don't have enough acid, and tell me if I'm wrong here, then you can get that overgrowth of the Helicobacter pylori, right? Is that how you say that?
Yeah.
I've had it before. I remember. But I didn't realize that that's how the ulcers develop. So when we say stress causes ulcers, yes, stress reduces stomach acid, which causes ulcers. And H. pylori has been found at the base of most ulcers, people with ulcers. And I have your product right here for H. pylori, right? And here's the thing, to anyone that's listening that's new to me, I'm not a person that's like, I don't just promote somebody because, it's some sort of an affiliation or anything, even though I'm affiliated with you guys. I actually use the products. I actually have them. I spend money on them. I best of my health that way. So tell us a little bit about the Mega Guard, because I have a feeling ulcers are going to increase as time goes on. We're going to have a lot of adults who are severely stressed out from loss of income, financial issues, fear, all of the things that people are dealing with. I'm predicting 2021 is going to be full of appointments to the gastroenterologist and people complaining about ulcers, which is really, in my opinion, going to be probably from the overgrowth of H. pylori, right? Is that?
Yeah. In fact, and as H. pylori overgrows, so you're absolutely right in that when you're stressed and you have lowered production of stomach acid, one of the first things that occurs is the H. pylori starts to overgrow. And when it starts to overgrow beyond a certain level, then it can create ulcers. It's in fact one of the biggest risks for things like stomach cancers as well, right? But even before the ulcers form, there's all kinds of changes that occurs in the stomach that people will feel in different ways. For example, one of the things that will occur is something called, from dyspepsia, you'll get the issue of not being able to empty the stomach, dropping into the small intestine, the food dropping into the small intestine effectively, right? So that is a major issue, because what you'll find is when you eat, people start to feel really tight and full and bloated in their stomach, and they're not emptying the gastric system, the stomach, into the intestine effectively. You'll also get then too many oral bacteria. We have 22% of all the microbes that live in your gut, or live in your body, live in your mouth, right? So your mouth is loaded with microbes, and there's lots of microbes in your mouth that are okay and fine if they're in your mouth, but if they end up in your gut, actually can be really problematic. And that's part of the gastric barrier system, right? Because you're swallowing billions and billions of microbes through saliva every single moment of every single day, but most of them are getting killed off in the stomach acid. If your stomach acid's compromised, then more of them are going to survive through. So there are organisms like Enterococcus and Bilophila. These organisms, when they are allowed to survive from the mouth through the gastric system and start colonizing the small bowel, you start getting things like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or IBS with chronic constipation. You start getting things like food sensitivities, allergies, severe leaky gut. All of those things are driven by a compromised small intestine. So you're not getting enough stomach acid. You're not getting proper gastric emptying. Your bowels are not moving properly now because of the inflammation and the confusion with the microbes that are now living in the gut, that should, in the small bowel, that shouldn't be, because they're coming in from the mouth, right? So there's this whole cascade of issues. And then here's the other downstream thing that occurs. When you have too many dysbiotic bacteria in your small intestine, right? Again, and that's because compromised stomach acid is allowing oral bacteria to make it through. The studies that show a dramatic increase in the risk of things like diabetes and metabolic syndrome, also liver dysfunction, because one of the things that is supposed to be occurring is as your liver produces bile and then releases bile through the gallbladder, you end up getting bile being reabsorbed at the end of your small intestine and back by the liver, cleaned up and sent through again. And bile is supposed to be an antimicrobial to keep the bacterial count in your small intestine low. Now, when you get a lot of this dysbiotic bacteria from your mouth and ending up colonizing into your small intestine, you'll get bacteria that can convert the bile into secondary bile salts. That secondary bile salts actually are really inflammatory to the large intestine. So now you're creating massive leaky gut and inflammation in your large bowel as well. And then when you have that leaky gut, the liver takes the brunt of the toxin production that leaks through into the circulation. So then you start getting compromised liver function as well. So there's all of these connections in the literature between things like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and diabetes and intestinal permeability with liver function and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? So everything gets compromised. So the ulcers would be a signal that something is severely going wrong in your stomach. But even before the ulcer is formed, there's going to be a huge cascade of things that occur in your small bowel, large bowel, in your liver, in your gallbladder, that all have a huge impact on your outcome. So yeah, it becomes extremely important to focus on making sure your stomach is functioning the way it should, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the main things that I try to, I'm trying to get across is, the part about the education about just, getting back to the basics with our health, and
Yeah.
how much sense isn't being made of keeping all of the toxic places open for people to continue to get sicker, and preventing breathing fresh air, which is so important. And, we did a webinar yesterday about the dangers of masks with kids, and, my partner, Diane Kaiser, and I know that she's interviewed you as well. She was saying, 70% of your expression of toxins comes through your breath.
Mm-hmm.
Your breath. I mean, and if we're not even starting at that point of breathing fresh air, I mean, what chance does our immune system have to prepare us, right?
Right.
One of the things that, that I strongly believe is they so-called the second wave or whatever coming through is from fear and stress and exhaling and inhaling our toxic waste and all of the things around what's going on and how people are living their lives. I truly believe that's going to be the cause of most people getting sick coming up in the next few months. So let's talk about a couple of solutions. I know we're getting close to time here, but I have got, so I'll show you, I've got the H. pylori Mega Guard. I have the IgG 2000, and I'll show the other ones in a moment, but I want you to tell about what the IgG 2000 is and what it's beneficial for.
Yeah, and I forgot to give you a little bit more information on the Mega Guard. So let me do that, and then I'll jump to the IgG. So the Mega Guard, besides the really specific licorice extract that's been shown to be able to support with healthy levels of H. pylori, because you also don't want to completely eliminate H. pylori, because there are studies that show when you completely eliminate it, then it increases the risk for other things, right? So there's a really happy area where you want to control H. pylori that you don't want it to go above. And that's kind of the focus of that product, of that ingredient that's in the product. Now, the other two ingredients are extremely important as well. I talked about the importance of gastric emptying properly from the stomach into the intestine, because if things sit in the stomach too long, they can also putrefy and cause issues in the stomach with bloating, creation of toxic compounds and so on. So there's an artichoke extract in there that's actually used as a prescription product in Europe that is really important for moving the bolus of food from the stomach into the intestines and then further on. So that movement of food is completely is really important and can be completely compromised in people with a compromised gut and microbiome. And then the last thing is a ginger extract in there, very high concentration gingerol, which creates a soothing effect on any sort of cramping and peristalsis that occurs, or any sort of inflammatory or nauseous kind of feeling that people may have from a disrupted stomach or disrupted small intestine. So it becomes a critically important thing, especially for people with SIBO, in order to support really healthy function within the small bowel and the stomach. And I use it just basically with every meal, just to improve gastric movement and timing and all that with the meal itself. Jumping to the IgG is one of my favorite products. So what it is, it has a whole complex of immunoglobulin G. So immunoglobulin G is one of the key tools that those adaptive immune responders use, right? So that is when you actually have true tolerance. When you have immunoglobulin G against compounds, it basically seeks out specific compounds, binds it, and basically neutralizes a compound so that the compound can either A, elicit more of an immune response, or B, create some sort of toxigenic response within the body. Right. So the immunoglobulins come from bovine source, or from cows. So now you imagine you've got cows out in the pasture. They're exposed to everything: viruses, bacteria, molds, environmental toxins, all of these things. And their immune system are building immunoglobulins against all of those things. And so we get to extract those immunoglobulins, purify them, and then take it orally. So basically what's happening when you take that orally is those immunoglobulins are released in the gut, and then they go to work by binding and neutralizing all kinds of things that could create an immune havoc within your gut or create a toxigenic response, right? So it's a very specific and specialized way of detoxing and lowering the toxic threshold within your gut and reducing inflammatory type of responses within the gut, the microbiome, because now things that would normally elicit an inflammatory response get neutralized by the immunoglobulin. The version of this is a medical food for the dietary and inflammatory management of inflammatory bowel disease and chronic diarrhea. So we are selling the supplement dose of it, but this product has tremendous amount of research behind it and is really, really effective.
Yeah. So just to be super clear, are you able to take it if you're in a chronic inflammatory response with the first immune response? Like, is it still to take then? Okay.
It's a great time to take it, yes, because it lends a helping hand to the immune system, right? Because it takes a bunch of the load off of the immune system by neutralizing lots of things that would elicit an immune response that don't need an immune response, right? So now the immune system is not as distracted by all of these things in the gut that may elicit an immune response. It can go focus on things like something that's entering into your respiratory tract, right? So it's really big in that. And what's been fascinating about that product for us is, when we first conceptualized it and put it out there, we were very focused on what the effects are in the gut, right? But what we're getting from people is all kinds of other effects in areas that we did not expect. Things like stress reduction, anxiety, skin changes, things like triglyceride changes, all of these things, because I guess when you look at it, when the toxic and inflammatory load in the gut is high, right, it affects every part of your body. And in some people, it manifests as stress response. In others, it messes up their lipids, and some people it expresses on the skin through many pathways. And so what we're finding is when you start bringing that a little bit under control, then you start seeing benefits in all other parts of the body. So we've been really fascinated by the feedback we get from health practitioners and what they're seeing with their patients.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to make a note of is also, you guys, is I'm a big advocate for only taking and eating what you need when it comes to anything, right? And in their supplements, vegetable capsule, which is cellulose, it's a plant-based, carrier, and water are the only other ingredients here, you guys. Fillers are one of the things I've preached about for so many years when I was back spending the wrong kind of money and, things like that. So really important that you are clear on your fillers as well. And all of these have the same filler. So, all right. So let's talk about real quick, and I've got my eye on the time and I'm going to check questions here in a moment. as well as my phone battery. Let's talk about the Mega Prebiotic. So this morning, my nephew asked me, we were talking about probiotics because we all take these in the house. And I said, and the prebiotic is the one that you take before, right? So I like to put this in my magnesium drink at night with my pomegranate juice and all that. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the prebiotic and what it's beneficial for.
Yeah, so we actually call it a precision prebiotic because what we've done is carefully selected oligosaccharides. I'll explain what those are in a second, that specifically feed keystone species within your gut microbiome. Now, what are keystone species, right? So keystone species are organisms within the gut microbiome who have been identified as critically important to the structure and function of the microbiome. When people have diminished keystone species, it leads to significant disruptions in the microbiome. And when you restore the keystone species, there are clear health benefits from doing that. In fact, some of the keystone species are inversely correlated, meaning oppositely related to number of conditions, like Akkermansia muciniphila is inversely related to everything under cardiometabolic syndrome. So obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and so on. These species are so important. And they feed and thrive on things like oligosaccharides. Now, what are oligosaccharides? Well, oligosaccharides are highly complex carbohydrates that we cannot break down, we cannot digest. We don't have the enzymes to do it, but they specifically feed certain organisms that have specialized enzymes to break down their highly complex structures. And in fact, oligosaccharides were the first foods that our microbiome were exposed to early on, because when you look at mother's milk, we have over 200 different types of oligosaccharides in mother's milk, none of which the baby can absorb for energy. All of it is there just to feed the baby's microbiome. So oligosaccharides are very foundational for the health of our microbiome, and we've selected 4 key oligosaccharides in this that feed the most important keystone strains within the microbiome. So it's really hard to match this kind of effect with even eating food, because it's so hard to know that you're getting the right oligosaccharides in the right amount from all the foods that you eat. So we wanted to make it a little bit more achievable and simple for people. That's why we created that product.
Yeah, and let me just say this, it's a powder, and I had to plug my phone in. So if I'm bobbing around a little bit, I apologize. So you guys, it's mango flavored, and it does not taste bad at all, like not at all. And I mean, I've got a kind of a picky teenager who critiques everything I put in front of him. What's this? What's that? And he drinks it. So it actually makes
my 10-year-old as well.
Yeah.
And kids, especially kids my kids' age, 7, 10 years old, it's so hard to get anything good and nutritious in them, right? Let alone fiber, prebiotics, and so on. So for us, this is a critically important way of continuing to help maintain and improve their microbiome, even at that age where it's really hard to get them to eat really well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's talk about the probiotic. So back when I first heard about Spore Biotics, I was taking, I think it was Prescript Assist. This is a very long time ago. Had to be kept in the refrigerator, I think, or maybe they made it shelf stable. I can't remember. So that's the first time I ever heard about Spore Biotics. Can you tell us the difference between a regular probiotic, and a Spore Biotic, and what's different about your product?
Yeah, so we were the first multi-spore probiotic that came out in the market. There have been other what they call soil organism products, right? So now people often confuse that soil organisms are spore formers. That's not necessarily true. The vast majority of soil organisms do not form spores. And when you use spores as a probiotic, you actually need human-derived spores, because there are spores in the environment that won't necessarily function as probiotics in the gut. They're more suited for the outside environment. So it's really important to distinguish that these are spore-based probiotics. I'll explain what that means, but they're spore-based probiotics that are derived from the human microbiome, so that these are species that are specifically adapted to the human gut. And they're universal colonizers, meaning they can colonize all of our guts equally. And normally we would get exposure to them from the outside environment. These are just the specialized ones that work within the gut. Now, the big difference between a spore and a non-spore is that a spore, when it's outside of the gut, it'll actually wrap itself in a calcified armor-like coating, which allows it to survive through that gastric system, right? So imagine this is a unique bacteria that nature has given the capability to survive through this gauntlet that is designed to kill bacteria. right? But it has that specialized capability. It's not one that we could mimic in the lab or in production. It's what nature has designed for this microbe, and it can survive through the gastric system. The moment it gets past the stomach acid and all that, it breaks out of the shell and becomes a live functioning probiotic for you. Why we honed in on the spores when we were the first to launch this multi-spore product is because of what they do in the gut, right? They are really unique organisms in that they orchestrate the function of the gut. They go in and act like the SEAL Team 6, for example. They're very good at reading the microbial environment. The fancy word for that is quorum sensing. And they can pick out overgrown and problematic organisms. They'll sit next to them and compete with them to bring down their numbers, right? So these spore-based probiotics have been in the market as prescription drugs since 1952, and in those prescription drug applications, they're used to treat gut infections as a highly specialized way of treating gut infections instead of a broad spectrum antibiotic, for example, that kills everything, right? So these guys go in, they can find specifically the problematic organisms and bring them down themselves. So our thinking was, if they can do that with the problematic organisms, can they increase the growth of the good guys within the gut, right? Do they have that opposite power? And sure enough, they do. They can actually dramatically increase the growth and diversity of the beneficial organisms. And then our next hypothesis was, if they can improve the microbiome in that way, then can that resolve leaky gut? Because we know that leaky gut is driven by dysfunction in the microbiome population. And then sure enough, we published a study in 2017 showing that with just taking this probiotic for 30 days, we completely resolve leaky gut type of issues and all of the markers associated with it in that 30-day period in the individuals that took the spore. So it became very exciting to us, and it's a very unique product. It's the only one, number one, it's the only multi-spore based product now that has any research behind it, right? So now we're getting companies coming out with their versions of it. We live in a Me Too kind of copycat environment in the supplement world. Now, since people are seeing the value in spore-based probiotics, we're getting other competitors coming in. But again, true to nature, true to their nature, they're coming in, throwing in a bunch of random spores, not doing any studies to verify that the product actually does anything. So that's the biggest distinguishing factor, is that we now have, I think, 9 or 10 published studies on that combination of the 5 strains to show you what occurs when they enter the gut.
Yeah, and then let's just keep in mind the other supplement companies probably charge way more, and then they add fillers into their ingredient list, which can actually do exactly the opposite of create a healthy gut and healthy immune system if you have a reaction to anything that they're filling their products with. I mean, we have to, remember that as well. Yeah. All right, I'm going to do my best to look at the Q&A without hanging anybody up and get to the couple of questions here, and then we'll wrap up. Mary Sure is asking, do you have any thoughts on coffee enemas? I understand they do not damage microbes, it's certainly not in the small intestine. Many feel it's such a toxic world right now that it's needed sometimes to help with the toxic load. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, now I can't say that there's any studies on coffee enemas and their impact on the microbiome, but just knowing what's in coffee, assuming you've got a good organic coffee that's clean, there's no reason to think that it would have a damage to the microbiome. If you're doing a coffee retention enema, I know from a lot of people that they get a tremendous amount of benefit from it. So I don't see a reason to not do it. But again, I think it has to be clean, organic coffee that is low in cytotoxins and so on.
Yeah, they actually sell coffee for coffee enemas out there in the world for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Kim is saying, do you have HCl with pepsin as a supplement? I love that question, Kim, because that was one of the things that I was looking at as well. In treating, H. pylori, you've got to replace with stomach acid. Do you guys have a product with that? We
don't. Now, one of our company philosophies is that if somebody else has something that works, we're not going to do it because you can buy it from them, right? And so HCl is critically important. We recommend it a lot as part of the therapeutics to revamping the gut. But there are a lot of companies that sell good HCl and pepsin, and you can use any one of them. And it combines really well with the MegaGuard. So we did add some HCl into the wheat rescue product. The wheat rescue product is the gluten digesting product. The reason why we added HCl in there is because we've got enzymes in there that work better in a low pH because what we want is to digest all of the gluten and gluten-related peptides in the stomach itself before it actually enters the intestines. So we did add it in there so that the moment the capsule comes open in the stomach, there's this additional amount of HCl that acidifies the environment so that the enzymes can go through and break up the gluten.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Carol is asking, I treat clients with food and environmental allergies. Would you recommend the IgG for treating these clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So the IgG plays a really important role in kind of reducing that toxigenic load and reducing those unfavorable inflammatory type of responses within the gut. So that can play a really good and important supportive role in that patient's immune response to things that they shouldn't be responding to.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, and then the last question by Kim, the spore-based probiotic, is that okay with mold illness or mold toxicity?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only is it okay, it's really important. Mold illness, mold toxicity will drive leaky gut, drive chronic low-grade inflammation, and create dysbiosis in the gut. So you need a strong microbiome as a foundation to deal with that kind of toxicity in your body. And in fact, the best way to control mold is to allow your commensal bacteria to thrive, because they will compete with fungus and mold and so on, right? So and then the gut also acts as a major hub for detox in the body. So as you're trying to detoxify from mold exposure and so on, you need a healthy microbiome to do that, to take some of the load off of the liver and the spleen and so on. So a healthy microbiome is paramount to everything. So yeah, the spores become critically important there.
Yeah, and I know a couple questions people have asked in the past. I want to make sure we cover real quick. The probiotic, what is the youngest age that can take that? A lot of kids in schools right now getting sick, bacterial infections on their face, all that stuff is happening. So how young can they be to start taking this, or how old do they have to be?
Yeah, so my kids have been taking it since they were about a month old. We've had it with kids as young as a few days old in our clinic here in Chicago. So typically my rule of thumb is if they're under 6 months or they're not yet on solid foods, you basically just pull open the cap, you take a little dab of the powder either on your fingertip or just pinch a little bit of it, and you can sprinkle it in their mouth, or you actually just dab it on your finger and put it in their mouth before they drink their milk or nurse. That way they wash it down and it goes into their system. Once they start going to solid foods, month 6, 7, 8, and beyond, then you can actually add in half a cap or a full cap into their food and mix it. My kids at the age of 7 and 10, they take 1 cap every day as maintenance. This time of year, as flu, rotavirus, all that stuff starts to circulate, we end up giving them 2 caps a day, or when we travel, we give them 2 caps a day for that added protection.
Okay, and then the last question that I have that I remember hearing is that, what if I can't tolerate probiotics, and that's one of the things I think people can forget. Sometimes the less efficient your immune system is operating, the harder it is to start a probiotic. It can be a little bit overwhelming, may cause diarrhea and whatnot. So is your recommendation the same? Open the capsule and cut back the dose and ease your way, like titrate your way up? Is that the best way to do that?
Yeah, and there's a distinct difference between not tolerating your conventional probiotics that you've tried versus not tolerating the spores, right? So there's 2 different reasons why. With the conventional probiotics, one of the reasons you may not tolerate it is because they are eliciting an immune response against them. The body doesn't necessarily, the immune system doesn't necessarily recognize them as normal resident bacteria, even though it says Lactobacillus acidophilus. Your Lactobacillus acidophilus in your gut would be completely different than this one. So your body doesn't necessarily recognize it as resident, right? So it may elicit an immune response, and you feel that immune response as intolerance. When it comes to the spores, the type of intolerance that people experience is a die-off reaction, meaning the spores are coming in, they're targeting organisms that are problematic. Those organisms are dying off. And as they die off, a lot of times they release toxins and things like that. The word for that is the Herxheimer reaction, right? So the reasons for the intolerance are completely different. The intolerance on the spore side is actually a good sign in many ways, because it's showing a change occurring within the microbiome. But the solution is the same. You would taper up, you would start slow, and you would just kind of you might go from half a capsule a day to 1 capsule every other day to 2 capsules a day. You just slowly bump it up until your body is very comfortable with it.
Okay, what is the maximum amount actually of the probiotic that you would recommend taking in normal circumstances?
So when I when I travel, if I feel like my body's run down and I feel like I'm starting to get something, I go as high as 4 caps a day, and often I'll take them all at the same time. I have done 10 caps a day, a dose 2, 5 at a time. And the reason for that is I was overseas and I ate something that I felt like, okay, maybe I'm getting a little food poisoning, and so I took 5 capsules a few hours after starting to feel like something's off, took a nap and then woke up, took another 5 capsules and then went to sleep. And then I woke up completely fine. So I've given friends and family when we travel doses that high if they feel like they ate something that is not agreeing with their system. But typically 2 caps a day for 98% of people. Some people with inflammatory conditions for a period of time may need to go to 3 or 4 caps a day. And if you're ever in an acute situation where you're not feeling well, you're overly stressed, you can go to 4 caps a day.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Yay, we made it through without any glitches. Yay. Yeah. This has been so informative, and I always appreciate your time. And, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you back again is not only is we need, your education right now more than ever, but you have so many new products. You have so many new products on your site, and I had just ordered a couple of them for the first time. So I wanted to share that information. So what we'll do on the replay, everybody, as you know, replay will go out within 48 hours. I will include links to everything so you guys can get out there. The replay will be in there. And also, if it's okay that can I provide an email for them to contact with questions, or is that okay? And is it your email or?
Yeah, I think you've been in contact with maybe Brittany, right, for the arrangement. Yes, if you send it to her, she'll make sure I get it, and we can answer people's questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again for your time and all of your amazing information, for just being such a credible and reliable company to continue to use. I really appreciate you. And, I'm going to have you back at some point. So
of course.
Appreciate you very much.
To it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You too. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye. Thanks, everybody.